the tech support booth. But I'm glad to have you all back here again today for the 6th annual in Western North Carolina Southern Appalachia Conference. It's been a pleasure to kind of go around and talk to so many of you. I had a chance to do that yesterday. And for those of you who don't know me, I'm Darren Waters. I'm an associate professor of history here at UNC Asheville and also executive director for community engagement. But I've had a chance to talk to so many of you about how you're experiencing the conference this year. And it's great to get so much positive feedback. I think we've had some great conversations over the past day and a half. Thursday night started out really well with Dr. Aaron Thompson, who is the president of the University System in Kentucky. And I think he gave a great presentation about, especially about the 4 pillars of success. And he emphasized family, community, self, and I think education. Those were the 4 pillars. I remember that. But it was a great, and I think we end well with the presentations that started yesterday morning with our students right here at UNC Asheville. A component of this conference has been that over the past 2 years, the Andrew Mellon Foundation has been funding certain components of the conference. One of those components is undergraduate student research. And I was really just proud to see, even last year and this year, to see these students who spent their summers doing research on topics related to the African American experience, some in the past, some looking at what is going on in the present. And I think it gives us some sense of what things can be, our suggestions about how we can continue to work to build community into the future. But great projects, and one of my favorite ones was on Loretta Aiken, who was from Transylvania County, from Brevard, and many of you might know her as Mom's Maiden. She really was a leader in the area of comedy. So it was a great presentation. We also had a great presentation, I don't know if it ended the day yesterday, but a discussion about the whole Appalachia identity, this new identity that has kind of emerged. And we had the pleasure of having Dr. Bill Turner, who is one of the forerunners in this area of the study of African American life in this region. He and his co-author, Ed Cabell, published an anthology on the topic of blacks in Appalachia in 1985, and it really has been the foundation for the work that many of us who are working in this area have been able to do. So we are glad to have you here to continue the conversations today. We will have a brunch at 11 o'clock honoring Stevens Lee High School. Many of you know the story of Stevens Lee as one of the only African-American high schools in Western North Carolina. It became a very prominent institution, educational institution, and we're glad to kind of honor Stevens Lee this year at the conference. So what I'm going to do now is turn it over to our panelists. We're going to talk about the NAACP in Western North Carolina, and I'll let them come up and actually introduce themselves, and we'll have a great conversation. Thank you.
All right, this is on. Yes. Wow. That's my microphone. Okay, we're all up here. And going down the roadside here, before we start, I am Penny Smith. I am a member of the Jackson County branch of the NAACP, and I am your moderator and historian for the morning. Going this way, we have Catherine Bartell. She is secretary of the Haywood County branch of the NAACP, and if you are up on NAACP lore, that really is a major job. And she is also active in Down Home, Carolina. Next to her is Melinda Lorenz, and she's from Henderson County, is the president of the Henderson County branch of the NAACP, and she is so active in her church, it's just hard to believe that she could even be here. I can remember reading her biography and was really impressed. Enrique Gomez is the president of my branch, Jackson County, and he is on the faculty of Western Carolina. And at the end is Robin Ellis, Yancy Mitchell. She has the distinction of having her branch featured in a Nation magazine article, and she is also president of that branch. What we're going to do today is set out a little bit of context. That's my job. And then we're going to turn to each of these people representing 4 branches, all of which have become active in the last decade, and talk a little bit about how the NAACP started here and has matured here and where that particular branch hopes to go. And after that, we will open it up to questions that you might have. I'm going to do the history in basically a couple of phases. And the first set of context I want to give you is the NAACP is not new in this part of the state, but it is new in the way it has been re-emerging in the western counties. Initially, the first branch of the NAACP in western North Carolina was started in the 1930s by Edward Pearson in, as you would expect, Asheville, which had the largest population of African Americans in this part of the state. The branch ebbed and flowed until World War II. After World War II, with the return of African Americans who had served in the service in defense of liberty and thought not twice about demanding it at home, the NAACP branch grew in membership here and focused on 3 things: economic opportunity, educational opportunity, and political opportunity, particularly getting to vote. Following Brown v. Board of Education, the Charlotte chapter of NAACP retained one of the 2 African American lawyers in Buncombe County, a man by the name of Reuben Daly, to work on its behalf and behalf of NAACP members here to desegregate schools. There is probably not a county in western North Carolina, west of Buncombe, that did not interact at one time or another with Reuben Daly, who would show up and litigate as necessary to begin slow, painfully slow process of desegregating the schools in the counties west of here. In addition to doing that type of litigation, which was fairly common for the national NAACP, it is what they are most noted for during the 1950s, in the late 50s and early 60s, the Asheville NAACP also undertook to do some civil rights nonviolence training, and they did participate in some individual legal redress cases. But their prominence began to ebb as we got into the 60s, and competing organizations in Asheville and elsewhere had more activist agendas in pushing civil rights forward. What the local NAACP did was become more visible in individual cases of legal redress. So phase 1 is mostly litigation, following the national example with Reuben Daly as the point man, and the Charlotte NAACP picking up the tab for some of that. Phase 2 becomes individual legal redress cases, and I want to use as an example for that the case of Shirley Ann West Parks. Shirley Ann West Parks was born in Macon County, and for the first 2 years of her schooling, she went to the African American school in that county, Chapel School, which had grades 1 through 12, taught by 2 teachers and a principal. She eventually became part of the first group who desegregated schools in Macon County, starting 3rd grade in East Franklin School. When she got out of high school, or nearly out of high school, she was told by her guidance counselor, who was white, that she probably should not think about college, that she should think about cleaning other people's houses. At that time, she managed to matriculate at St. Augustine's and graduated with a BA in elementary education, and came back to Macon County because she wanted to be a teacher, obviously. And she wanted to be a teacher in her home county. What she did then was work for 4 years in a department store, applying every year for a teaching position and being told she simply did not have enough experience, which is hard to get if you're working in a department store. But she was, after 4 persistent years, hired as a teaching assistant. And every year, for the next 4 years, she applied for a teaching position. And every year, she was told she just did not have enough experience. Although at that time, she had also matriculated at Western Carolina and was engaged in finishing her work for a master's degree. At that point, she started to interact with Equal Employment Opportunity Commission and the NAACP, who took on her case as an example of blatant discrimination. And at that point, she did get a teaching job. It was federally funded. It was a Title I reading position. But it was a teaching job. And it's that kind of work slowly that the NAACP did occasionally engage in this part of the state. Ms. West Parks recently retired a couple of years ago. Interestingly enough, at the time she retired, she was principal of the school she desegregated in the 3rd grade. And the commemoration of her retirement on the part of the local newspaper was what a wonderful person she was, what a wonderful set of skills she had, and how sorry everyone was that she was leaving. And no mention, of course, that it took 8 years to have one's first teaching position. That's phase 1. That's what the NAACP was here, but was certainly below the radar. Phase 2 begins in 2008, when the first African American is elected President of the United States, igniting a backlash personified by the Tea Party and some fairly obvious racists. In general, that the Republican Party, seeing an opportunity, keep in mind that Mitch McConnell said his job for the next 4 years was to make sure that President Obama was a one-term president. The GOP then plowed money into the 2010 election. The reason for that is it's a redistricting election. What that means is that you win in 2010, you get to redistrict for the next decade. And they did win in 2010 in lots of states, often with overwhelming majorities. And given that that success was followed by computer-assisted redistricting, or gerrymandering to the max, and that was followed immediately by the Citizens United decision. By 2013, we had, in North Carolina now, the test case for money in politics and political advantage. And at that time, we had a state legislature that decided things needed to change in our state. It began with changing voting rights, and it moved from that to eliminating regulations for clean air and water, to cutting access to social programs, to opting out of Medicaid, which affected over 500,000 people, all of them poor, to eliminating a progressive tax schedule such that it was, to a flat tax, repealing the racial justice law, limiting access to abortion and family planning, and decimating public education and higher education. In response to that, the state NAACP, under the leadership of Reverend Barber, began the Moral Monday movement. The Moral Monday movement in 2013 came to Asheville, the Mountain Monday Moral Movement, and 10,000 people hit the streets at Pack Square. That's basically phase 2 of the NAACP in this region, because beginning in 2013, numbers of people in the West, somewhat shocked and certainly disappointed in our legislature, began to look for ways that we could come together to protest what was happening. I quote from Reverend Barber on 2013 in the mountains. "From the mountains to the coast, we're sick of this mess. This is no momentary hyperventilation or liberal screaming match. This is a movement. We have a governor that has decided to be on the wrong side of history. We have a legislature that is bragging and boasting about its power and is legislating on the basis of lies and discrimination. Though they have temporary power, the future does not belong to them." The title of this conference is Existence as Resistance. And I would argue that the existence of a Macon County teacher who goes from teacher to principal, from desegregating student to principal, is a perfect example of existence as resistance. I would also argue that the existence of new NAACP branches throughout the West is another example of resistance. The question will be, can we all become an expression of resilience? What, in fact, will be our staying power? What we've asked each of these representatives from 4 different branches to do is to tell us their beginning story, their coming of age story, and where they hope to go from here. And I'm turning it over now to Catherine Bartell from Haywood County.
Good morning. Our journey into race work really began back when Grace Episcopal Church of the Mountains showed a film called Traces of the Trade. This is about an Episcopal family that discovers that their forebears were slave traders. And they feel a lot of guilt about the fact that their inheritance comes from slavery. And they take it upon themselves to take a pilgrimage to Ghana and learn more about the slave trade and struggle with what they owe to the world as a result. After the film discussion in that church, Lynn Forney, who is our African American director of a local community center, stood up and threw down the gauntlet and said to them, "If you care about this, then do something." And so she and a member of the church, Mary Elizabeth Stager, teamed up and they started a race dialogue group in Waynesville. They hired 2 facilitators from Asheville's Center for Participatory Change, Craig White and Tammy Forte Logan, and they met with us for 5 years. And they went through race in U.S. history, institutional racism, microaggressions, implicit bias, et cetera, but most of all, we heard lots of stories from our African American neighbors about what it's like to live in black skin in our town. And sometimes it was shocking to us. I remember the time that Trayvon Martin was killed and George Zimmerman had just been acquitted. And we asked how many people were surprised by that verdict. The white people, almost all of them were surprised. The black people said, no, we saw that coming a mile away. And then we had a very interesting conversation about why our expectations were different. And that's the kind of learning that happened in that group. While we were meeting, in 2012, some white high school boys burned a cross on the lawn where a biracial girl was staying for the night in order to intimidate her. And we were horrified by this. We responded by reporting it to the Southern Poverty Law Center by calling the state attorney general's office. We also wrote letters to the editor, and we went to the school board and we suggested curriculum that they could use to teach about the civil rights movement and what burning a cross actually means. Of course, none of that happened. We also reached out to the victim and her family, and they came to some of our meetings. We tried to be supportive, but the victim ended up changing schools, and life went on. Changemakers became focused on relationships, and some of us wanted to continue with an activist organization. And we noticed Reverend Barber, of course, and the Moral Monday movement, and we thought, well, now there's an organization that's getting things done. So we decided we wanted to start a branch of the NAACP. We met several times along with some Jackson County folks, with Jerry McCombs, who was our field director at that time, and he helped us figure out how to get started. And on March 29 of 2014, he was with us as we did our first election of officers in Henry County. We wanted to support the interests of African Americans primarily, but also the poor, the disenfranchised, public schools, and we wanted to establish voter registration drives and so forth. One of the early founders of our branch was Mary McLaughlin, who was our first secretary. She was very good at keeping in touch with the state office for us. We had some challenges, some growing pains as we got going. Early on, we had a conflict between our president and our secretary, and we lost our secretary for a couple of years. Now that I'm the secretary, we have 2 assistants who manage our membership for me, and I do the correspondence and publicity and maintain our social media. We worried about how this was going to go with our community because we'd heard all those stories in Changemakers about what it's like. So we talked and we agonized about who should be our first president, and we decided that we should start with a white president because we weren't sure that an African American would feel safe in that position. We didn't know what the community response would be. So we chose Chuck Dixon, a white attorney from Waynesville who was fairly well known. We now have a black president, Reverend Walter Bryson. We found that partnering with our local AME Zion churches was a good way to get African Americans involved because those churches have always supported the NAACP, and we got a lot of our members from those groups. Some of our biggest challenges have been engaging younger people in our organization. They see the NAACP as an old people's organization. The NAACP has been around a long time, and everybody in it has gray hair. So we're still struggling with that one. I'm planning to meet with some younger people sometime this week about that. Some of our biggest successes have actually been in the realm of the Legal Redress Committee. Our Legal Redress Committee, when we first started, got a complaint from someone in Canton because the Reynolds High School, which was the black high school, was being developed as a community center by Billy McDowell and Gladys Knight. And this person remembered going to that school and seeing things like industrial waste in the dirt and so forth, and he wanted to know, is it really safe there? So I contacted the Department of Natural Resources, and they are in charge of landfills, and they said, yes, that area was a landfill used by Champion Paper in the 1950s before the creation of the EPA. And I thought, oh. And so knowing that that was a black community, I was worried. So they came out and they tested the soil, and they found something because they wrote a 200-page report, and now they're planning a $1 million plus cleanup of that area. Another case we have going is a legal complaint with the EEOC, the Equal Employment Opportunity Commission of racial discrimination from a local employer. And the EEOC is investigating that very seriously. I spent a lot of time helping our person put together evidence that he has collected. In addition, we keep hearing from parents of biracial and African American children in our schools that our schools have a real problem with racism. We've had a lot of racial bullying, and sometimes it has ended in assault. And so one of our successes is that our education committee has been working with the school superintendents who have been quite resistant in the past, but they have somehow managed to get them to go along with having a workshop for teachers on how to deal with race issues in school. And that's going to happen on November 20th, and we're very excited about that. The superintendents are coming and bringing 40 teachers. Our future holds more teacher workshops. It also holds, we took a pilgrimage last spring to Montgomery, Alabama. 50 of us went in a bus to see the new lynching museum and the legacy museum. And when we came home, we really wanted to do something in response to that experience. So we are working to memorialize the victim of lynching that happened in Haywood County in 1900. And we're currently trying to develop a community coalition of different churches and organizations who will join us in this effort so that we can do a soil collection project from the site and send that to the Legacy Museum. And we're also hoping to erect a historical marker. But along the way, we want to do a series of educational events in the community as well. Did I leave anything out?
Okay. Up next will be Belinda Lawrence from Henderson County.
Good morning. As it was stated, I am the president of the Henderson County branch, and I'm also the District 1 director for Western North Carolina. A position that I was forced into because Mr. McCombs was made the membership chair, and then they gave me I got a phone call from Reverend Barber, said, well, Ms. President, you're now the district director. Can you hear me now? I also have a little allergy problem going on. Our branch in Henderson County was active in the 60s doing integration. And our first president at that time was, we called him Bull, but his name was Elliot Benjamin. So it was really active, and they did a lot as far as working with the Attorney Daly and with the integration of the school. Well, for several years, you could see the progress of that branch, and then it just started to slide and wane, and eventually there was no activity in our branch. Anytime we had an issue or concern, we had to call the Buncombe County or the Asheville branch to ask them to take care of it. Although we did not lose our charter, because we had some life members, we just wasn't an active branch. Then again, it emerged in the 80s under the leadership of some ministers in Henderson County due to some issues that were going on in the school as far as discrimination. But I guess say from 1986 up to 1996, we were very active in the community, especially in the school system. We had Reverend Pollard to become a president, and at times we would have events with the school board. We had interaction with parents and school administrators on how to communicate with the African American students. So that was a good relationship. It was the only committee that was really working really hard was the educational committee. Well, then later on started to dip again after we had some success in getting some changes made in the school system. Reverend Pollard was president maybe for 2 terms, 4 years. Then Mr. Frank Wilson became president, and after that I was the president. So I would say in '97 we had a difficult time getting, especially the African American community, to come and support the NAACP. We would have maybe 6 members at the meeting. And those 6 of us were fighting all the issues that concerned us: racism and discrimination in school, housing, law enforcement. We were trying to handle all of that. So we just stopped existing. Once again, when there was a concern, we had to contact, at that time, Elder Hayes, who was the president of the Asheville Buncombe branch, to step in. In 2008, there was a shooting in a predominantly black community called Green Meadows. A young man had stolen an electronic item from Kmart, and he ran down the street, which maybe a couple blocks, to that community because he was from the community. The police came on that community. They thought he had a gun. And this was over in the morning around 1 o'clock. Over 150 bullets were shot into various homes and the church in that community. So one of the concerned citizens contacted the state branch of the NAACP, wanting to know what could be done about this because that was an overkill. Luckily, no one was injured, but there was a lot of damage from the bullets. So about a week later, Reverend Barber sent representatives from the state up, and we had a meeting at the Union Grove Baptist Church that received some of those bullets in the walls of their edifice. When he came, he didn't come up, he sent Al McShirley, the attorney, and Reverend Gatewood and 2 other officers. We had this meeting, and the first question Mr. McShirley asked was, do you want to reorganize your Henderson County branch of the NAACP? Of course, everyone felt that it was the need to do that because we needed that voice, we needed that presence in the community. Well, they, according to some of the members, they felt like since we wasn't active, that they would have to start all over again as far as getting a new branch. And he assured them that the branch still had his charter, it just wasn't an active branch. And he needed to know who was the last sitting president at that time. And one of the members from the back says, well, Melinda was the last president. So he turns around, looked at me, and he says, well, Melinda, I guess you're still the president. And I did not want to do it, I really didn't, because I was just really frustrated with the support we had gotten, the non-support we had gotten before. But I took that charge on. We started reorganizing the Henderson County branch. We had to get it up to 50 members. And then in less than 2 weeks, we did have 50 members. We had members of all races and all backgrounds. We then had an election at this Union Grove Baptist Church where it was finalized that I would be the president, and I have been the president ever since. But it started with that shooting. We later learned that this young man did not have a gun. One of the rookie officers discharged his firearm in his car. That set off the barrage of the other shootings from the police department and the sheriff department. The community met with the elected officials. They did damage repair and they tried to come together to meet with the community, which was still working. Here it is, 2019, still trying to build a relationship in that community. Because I'm not going to sugarcoat it, the community has some issues. There's one section of it, there's a lot of drug trafficking. And these are not local people that's bringing the drugs there. People that come in from the other areas, so there's a mistrust in that community with the police, so they won't report a lot of activity that's going on. We've had a murder down there. Henderson County only has about 4,000 African Americans in the community. So those are some of the challenges we're facing. But our branch has veered on, we have gone on, and we continue to work and with the community, face the issues. We have built a relationship with law enforcement. Some of us have attended training with the police department and the sheriff department. We're all on a first name basis. In fact, the chief of police, if there's a concern or an issue about to happen, he will call me personally and say, Ms. Lawrence, I want to let you know this is about to happen, or this has happened, and this is, can you meet me in my office so I can give you a report? Not only has he met with me, he's met with our legal redress. We have our education committee now is working with the school system because there's a disparity of discipline in our schools among the white students and the students of color. And we want to know why that is occurring. So we have met with the education committee, has met with the school superintendent, and he said he wasn't aware of it. But he is now. We went well equipped. We had PowerPoints, we had all kind of information for him. So now he wants us to come back and they're gonna have a workshop with the teachers so that and show these PowerPoints so they can see that there is disparity going on. We've had disparities as far as driving while black or brown, which we've contacted the city police department and the county sheriff department about those. So we're working on those issues. And there have been some changes, significant changes. We also have addressed the issue of voter suppression, the gerrymandering. We have a very active political action group. Now, mind you, I was already active in some other organization before the NAACP reorganized. I was with the League of Women Voters. So I'm one of the ones in Henderson County that worked on ratifying the ERA in North Carolina, which is a great accomplishment. You know, we just need two more states to work on that. But I thought I could be more effective working in the NAACP because of the status of the NAACP. People respect the organization. And once you approach them, they're going to sit and listen. So that has been a big challenge. It's trying to get the African American community on board. Our branch has over 100 and some members, and I guarantee you 3/4 of my membership are white. Because we came together, we saw that what affects me affects them also. Our first issue was the Affordable Care Act. Now, a lot of you know that Tom Apodaca, he was the senator at the time. He strongly opposed that. So we protested and rallied, and went on. We met in front of his office until he's no longer the senator, thank goodness. But that was one of the biggest concerns in Henderson County. 26% of the children in North Carolina live in poverty. And that 26%, and 25% of it is in Henderson County. It's only 1% lower than the state average. So there was a need for us to address those concerns. Medicaid expansion, food and welfare, housing is an issue. So those are just some of the things that we have really been targeting. A lot of our members have volunteering on different boards so they can bring the information back to the body as to what we need to challenge next, what we need to address next. Homelessness is one of them. We're having a serious issue with that. When Dr. Barber came to Hendersonville before he had the Moral Monday in Asheville, he came with the Poor People campaign. They came on a bus to Hendersonville, and they went to the homeless campsites in Henderson County and other areas up here in western North Carolina. There has been a resistance among some people about the expansion of the branches here in western North Carolina. They feel like we really don't need it up here in the mountains, but we need it. We really need it. We need to come together, and this is what we have done with all these branches. We now have 7 branches in western North Carolina when we only had 2 at one time, and that's a great achievement. But if we come together, we can branch out even more and have more branches, because we all are striving to reach the same goal: equality for all people, social justice issues that concern all of us, the criminal system, how it affects not only my children, but your children. Why should a 16-year-old be treated like an adult? Spoke with Chuck McGrady on Tuesday. You know, he has put in a bill and he's getting funding. He actually got the funding where they can change this. They don't need to be in an adult facility, children. So I commend him on that. Even though we have separate views about things, some things we can come together with on him. Now we got to work on Senator Chuck Edwards. He doesn't feel a need for Medicaid expansion. A lot of his employees, because you know he owns McDonald's, need Medicaid expansion. So I want to encourage everyone here to write to Senator Taylor, Senator, what's his name?
Edwards.
Edwards?
Yeah,
Senator Edwards. I forgot his name that quick. Edwards, and tell him about the importance of Medicaid expansion and some other bills that we're trying to put forth. If only, my biggest challenge as a branch president, as I stated before, is just getting the black community or the community of color to realize that we're not just here when there's a crisis. And when I mean a crisis, we get calls all the time about, my son's been arrested for selling drugs. We can't go get them out of jail. But come to us when there's a crisis for us, the disciplinary actions in the school, housing issues. We have a case now that we're working on where a young couple is living in inadequate housing. The landlord is a slumlord. They're living in a mobile home and they can look through the floor. They're an interracial couple. We have another issue of crime. Crime in an area that we're trying to work on. And then there's a hate crime issue going on that we're working on. I'm not at liberty to go into it because there's other measures been taken. But this young lady has biracial children, and her home has been targeted with racial slurs, a bomb, those type of things, in Henderson County. So we're working on that. So as you can see, there's work needed to be done in all our areas up here in Western North Carolina, just not in Henderson County or Buncombe County, but every county in North Carolina, in the western part of North Carolina, needs to come together and address these concerns. As I stated before, your problem is my problem, and my problem is yours. So why can't we come together? And I want to thank these presidents right here. They're a fantastic group, and the secretary. There's only one I have a little issue with working with, but that's because I love her. But who would ever thought that Haywood County, Jackson County, and Nancy Mitchell would have an NAACP in Jackson County? And that's because of the hard work of these individuals. But yes, Dr. Barber was very instrumental. He and Laura coming, meeting with us. In fact, I think they had myself and a couple more members going up and down 40 and 26, traveling with them to establish these branches. But I want to say to everyone, just keep fighting. Keep fighting for social justice. The mission of the NAACP, if you're an NAACP member, look at that mission. Take that mission serious, very serious, because all of us at one time have been a victim of social injustice, inequality, and if we haven't been, trust me, you will be. If you are a woman and you're a person of color, you're going to face these issues. You're going to face these issues of social injustice being done to you. So I want to thank you for allowing me having this time. And now we're going to
go to Enrique.
Our branch specialist and president is here.
Okay, Enrique Gomez of Jackson County.
Good morning, everybody. Talking about beginnings. In 2012, 2013, it became obvious in the States that we had people that had a radical agenda in this state who have taken over two major branches of government, and they were pushing things. A lot of things having centered with economic issues, Medicaid expansion, essentially blocking the Affordable Care Act from being fully implemented. We also had a monster voter suppression act. So it became obvious to a lot of us in the movement that we needed some entity, something that had a group that had the brand, had the name recognition, had the infrastructure on the ground to help organize people around these issues, to lead a movement, and more important than anything else, have a moral analysis of the issue. And in 2012, 2013, in the state, that was the conference of branches of the NAACP. So that is when it showed up in my radar. Now, talking about the beginnings, of course, that has to be filtered through my experience. Would I be here if there had not been a Mountain Moral Monday in the tiny town of Sylvan in 2013? And Melinda Lawrence, who is here to my right, had not stood up there to the mic in front of hundreds of people and actually proposed the bold idea of having perhaps an NAACP branch here in the mountains, far west from any other branch. And could we make this happen? Could there be a sign-up sheet? And lo and behold, I went ahead and signed up, right? Not only that, would I be here if I didn't have, say, Marie Cochran, who is sitting here in the audience at one point, so reminding me that there was an organizing meeting and roping me in. Enrique, would you want to come to this meeting at this Baptist church in Silva to help organize an NAACP branch? Would I not be here, right? Would I be here if it weren't for, say, Avram Friedman, who helped organize that particular organizing committee and said, do you want to join this committee? You know, and eventually he and I served as first and second vice president of the branch. Our first branch president was Reverend Charles Lee, who leads the Liberty Baptist Church also there in Silva. Okay, at some point, I guess there was a decision. Who should we go? Who should be the first and second vice president? He and I actually, Avram and I, flipped a coin, and then that coin, I remember, we flipped it on the boards, and that coin was actually stuck in between the boards. And said, well, what are we going to do? Okay, so I'll go ahead and just follow along. And eventually, of course, that I was invited by a search committee to be the second president of this particular branch. Well, talking now about essentially show of our beginnings as well, show of our coming of age. One of the things that we've done too, and this is something that Melinda has pointed out, is that these new branches, and also the Henderson branch, they are very peculiar, very, very unusual, not just for the state, but also for the nation as a whole. And that is that they are primarily white, right? And that is because the NAACP in this historical moment was essentially leading and articulating a moral vision for a community, leading a movement and addressing many of these issues that we care about, right? Many of these things are centered around race, right? But race, these issues are also sort of interconnected. And here this allows us to talk about the intersectionality of all of our issues and all of our movements, right? That also made it possible. One thing I wanted to add is that I am told that I am the very first Latino president of an NAACP branch, at least in North Carolina. I think that's true. I would like to think there isn't. Maybe there was maybe at some point there was a Latino somewhere out there east that became president, maybe even for a few weeks. Maybe that's not true, but at least I am told by people in the leadership of the state. So a lot of things that we've been able to do has been to essentially translate some materials into Spanish, reach out to the immigrant community, make a presence for us now. And one of the things I'm interested in is essentially be this transfer of knowledge, of organizing and activism, of what works historically has worked in this country, to transfer into these new communities that are coming into awareness of their political power. So that's one of the things that we worked on as well. Some of the things that have been sort of challenges. Okay, a lot of that we deal with, what's done, is that we help organize, say, marches, movements. Some of our members have been arrested in direct actions in Raleigh, sort of addressing any number of these issues as well. We have had more, like I said, Mountain Moral Mondays. We've organized 2 since then in Silva and also in Franklin as well. And 2016, we brought even Reverend Barber to come in and address this what was going on. Say at the time, leading up to the election of 2016, but also putting that moral framework to many of our movements as well. Some of the challenges that we have, if you look at, we have this paradox in the NAACP, and that is that when you look at its structure, you look at its bylaws, it really is written for an organization to be resilient and to last a long time, right? This is the organization, the civil rights organization that has lived has existed for more than 110 years, that have been able to sustain a movement through the darkest period of Jim Crow legislation and essentially the violence of lynchings that was essentially not adequately opposed as well. They are the ones that need to organize in these communities for a long period of time when there are not going to be many successes, but then you create a foundation by which you have those successes. Few people know that Rosa Parks was not just a lady that was really tired on a bus one day. She was a person that essentially had been for many years the secretary of her NAACP branch in Montgomery, Alabama, who had been trained at the Highlander Center, right, where that still exists, still going on, you know, and still is the subject of attacks and violence. You know, one of the facilities was torched last year, you know, for the work that they did. Well, that's still going on, right? So essentially, for us, one of those that we've done is that we've tried to replicate what Darnell Moore, who writes for the Movement for Black Lives, and is a writer and activist, calls the spectacularities of movement building. What are those spectacularities? They are the massive marches. They are the direct actions that get people arrested and draw the media in. Those are the things that draw people in, and those things are important. They help build a movement, they bring the issues forward. But there are other dimensions to the movements that are absolutely essential. You know, the things that are needed to sustain organizations on the ground, build those networks, the quiet work, right? We have, some of this know-how essentially comes from the fact that many of the branches of the NAACP draw from black communities, and you look, for instance, at the leadership style that comes from those movements. And you see, for instance, the charismatic, cisgender, black male preacher that comes in. And not to disparage those people too much, because they have done an important contribution to our movement. But the thing about this is that they become a stand-in for what we think is leadership in civil rights organization. For us, it has been an effort to try to recognize that within the black community that we're looking into for leadership, there are many modes of leadership, far more than that they're essential. Just to give yourself an example, we are told of the heroic work of those secretaries during the civil rights period in Alabama, where the Alabama SBI was coming in trying to get a hold of the roster of members of every single branch of the NAACP that was out there at the time. And the thing about this is that even to this day, the bylaws are very strict about who has access to those lists, right? And you have the heroic effort of those secretaries that essentially in the middle of the night, when they got wind that this was going to happen, right? They took those lists and drove all the way to Georgia, away from the reach of the SBI, to protect that, and that is why those branches continue to survive, right? Because they were not targeted. But the thing about this is that many of these things also hinder many of our abilities and keep us from being as active a group or an active and effective and prompt and responsive organization as we could, because we have all the structures to sort of limit that. Well, for me, going out and try to find ways of being able to be true to the bylaws and that spirit, while at the same time keeping an organization that has been nimble, has been a real struggle. You go to state conferences and winter trainings, and you find out that we are going to be trained to be either a president or a secretary or a treasurer. You come in and you find out that there's a person there that all they do is essentially read the bylaws to you and essentially tell you that only do what's on the bylaws, you cannot do anything else. What I found out, and it took me years to figure this out, is that that's not where the knowledge is. The knowledge is in between sessions, in the hallways where you often find black middle-aged women just sitting there, right, very quiet. And it took me a while to say, well, who are these black women? Just go ahead and start talking about it. Well, they are usually the branch secretaries or people who have been secretaries. They have all the know-how, not the people leading the sessions. They actually know the workarounds. Many of these women have been leading their branches for decades. They are the ones that essentially introduce technology into their branches and help bring this continuity. They are know-how. And of course, coming in, and I read, by the way, as white, right? So I come in, and of course, I'm trying to start a conversation and get some of this information from them. Of course, I don't want to talk to you because you're just another white guy. Why would they want to engage you? So it takes a while to actually build those relationships and say, this is how it is done. These are the workarounds, all the things that are essentially passed almost as an oral tradition, as opposed to something that's written to help you do that. So for us to be acquainted to those modes of leadership, that essentially becomes sort of essential. So what are we doing? Where do we go from here? What do we hope to actually accomplish, particularly with all these often white, dominant white branches in the NAACP? I'll just give you sort of a metaphor, if you will work with me, yes, please. Forests are very different from, say, tree farms, very different, and the difference happens below the ground. Why? Because the branches, the root system of all these trees, different species, talk to each other through a network of fungal rhizomes that pass information one to each other, right? You only see the trees, but for instance, forests have a way to respond to disease. Why? Because chemical information gets passed through this rhizome root network for miles ahead of the disease, so that trees themselves can actually protect themselves and start to build up stores to be resilient against disease, right? Tree farms are not like that. Those root systems don't talk to each other. As a matter of fact, you bring a Christmas tree to your home, you're essentially are bringing a very rude person that is in the process of dying, and you're just dressing it up with a lot of decorations, right? So the thing about this is that we don't want to be like that. As a metaphor, I think that in these mountains, this is what we're trying to do, right? Because, for instance, some of these trees, they actually help each other, right? They can actually pass nutrients through the root system, one through the other, to help each other around. We can, as by means of metaphor, we can do that. We in the NAACP, what we can do is that we can create spaces, even if we're not majority black, if we're mostly white, or even Latino, what we can do is that we can allow the creation of spaces to make, that allow for the manifestation of radical black love, to put it quite lightly, right? Without us even knowing what that is, we can create the spaces where that can actually happen, right? We can start conversations in our communities to develop hyper awareness of the present condition of the black body. Because we cannot see black people if we have black bodies in front of us, and we have this condition, neural condition that makes us hyper vigilant under the presence of black bodies, and want a police system, a police state that essentially monitor and police these black bodies who are present. If we develop this hyper-awareness to allow for it to be complex, to develop the capacity for us to segment the details of the black experience in these mountains, in Appalachia, right? And allow for maybe an Afrofuturist Appalachia, where we can develop new expressions of community, to pass that know-how, to create those spaces, to develop new forms, new cultural norms, new economic systems, and allow them to develop organically, just like the roots and the fungal networks that make the forest all around these mountains. Make it possible. Make it aware. All right, with that, I think I'm going to be done for now.
And moving now to Yancy Mitchell and Robin Ellis.
Well, I can't follow those metaphors. But it's an honor to be here, and it is really an honor to be involved in the reemergence of the NAACP in Western North Carolina. I'm very proud of that. I've served as the president of our unit for 3 years, and secretary before that. And our group has some similarities to the other groups. We emerged about the same times. As a response to the 2012-2013 hideous legislature that was going on at the time. If you did read the article about our branch online and from the Nation Online magazine, that's not a picture of a branch, but it could be. I think it's a stock picture of white people at a rally, but that's pretty much what we look like. But the real story is not that we're a majority white branch, is that where we are is a majority white area, and that's a significant reason that it's almost appropriate that we're there, and it's almost, it almost seems likely that we need to be there. We got organized about, like I said, about the same time. We're facing the same issues that other parts of the states are facing, the frustration at the outrageous things that the legislature was doing, the monster voter suppression bill, teacher pay, the emergence of unchecked charter schools, lack of Medicaid expansion, low minimum wage. These were detrimentally affecting everyone in the state, regardless of their race. 6 years ago, Reverend Barber packed the community room of Trinity Episcopal Church in Spruce Pine, North Carolina, and he brought the moral message that he'd been spreading throughout the state, and especially in our capital under the domain of Moral Mondays. The next day, Asheville had their own Moral Monday, which had about 10,000 attendees, I think. So this started inspiring people in Yancey County to organize their own Moral Monday. And they did, and they had hundreds of people attend, which surprised them. At the time, Wanda Woodby, who was our charter president, along with a couple other people, artist Raven Tata and attorney Patty Smith, got together. They were looking for a long-term approach to these laws that had gone into effect in 2012. And they were tired of all these so-called progressive organizations popping up and fizzling out after they figured they had everything done, and after a few well-written letters to the editors and a nice little rally, they got their thing done and they dispersed. So they were looking for a long-term solution where they didn't have to reinvent the wheel every time something came up or an issue came up, and that they were on the ground ready to go when something came up. So they did turn to the NAACP, as did other branches in the area. They liked how, according to Wanda, they liked how the mission statement, they liked how everything was framed within a moral context that transcended race or male, female, whatever. They already had boots on the ground. They didn't have to reorganize. And while we may, at the time, be the least diverse memberships of units pretty much throughout the country, I feel that the most important issue, like I said, is the makeup of the community that's in our jurisdiction. While Wanda and Raven and Patty were meeting, in the next county, I was busy working and my own business, working 80 hours a week, and the voter suppression law came up, and I had been working for 15 years with the Board of Elections during elections, and I was just appalled. And I had no time to deal with that, but my daughter and I decided we'll go to Raleigh and see what Reverend Barber is and attend the Moral Monday that's emphasizing voting rights. So we ended up arrested, and this happened again, and Reverend Barber's very compelling, so one of my sons was also eventually arrested. But I started attending meetings with these people from Yancey County, the county over, who we always felt was way more progressive than us. And we ended up with the infamous Jerry Combs and organizing our branch. Wanda became the first vice president, and we decided to have a vice president from, Wanda was first president, we decided to have vice president from Yancey County and from Mitchell County. So I was the one from Mitchell, and Raven was the one from Yancey. So our area has produced a lot of challenges by putting this unit together. If you look at the demographics, that's one reason. Spruce Pine's 98% white, just under 2% Latino, and 0.2% African American. Yancey County is not much different, but it's roughly 93% white, 5% Latino, and 1% black. I got questions all the time. Why do you have an NAACP here? Every few years I try to address that in a well-written letter to the editor in the newspaper. But, and some of the history of the place doesn't make it a likely place for an NAACP unit. Mitchell County was the last county in the state to recognize Martin Luther King Day as a holiday. Yancey County schools were the first school system that was forced to integrate through federal court order. Under 2 lawsuits brought by the NAACP and several families from Yancey County. But prior to that, a lot of the students from Yancey County drove an hour and a half each way to Stevens Lee High School to attend there. And it's interesting, one of the older guys that attended there said they got picked on by the city African Americans because they were from Podunk, Yancey County. So that, I thought that was interesting when he told me about that. But the few African American communities that have developed over the years diminished substantially in 1923 in Mitchell County when town vigilantes forced black workers along with their families onto a train and sent them to Asheville. This was in response to one of those white woman's allegations of a black person assault. And that took care of much of our African American population. According to research that I've done at the state archives, at that time, the unofficial motto of Mitchell County was, no Democrats, no Negroes, and they've pretty well kept to that. Last year, the local high schools banished Shakespeare themed play in mid-performance because 2 of the actors two male actors had a stage kiss. And they canceled all plays by that group and all Shakespearean plays. We did approach the school, and I fixed up a nice packet for everyone on the school board about that. The year before that, students at Yancey County High School made and produced and displayed an effigy of a Latino person and an African American person hanging from a cross. This was known by the librarian, the English teacher, the principal, and all that ended up doing was expelling a couple kids for 2 days. And they tried to push that under the rug, but we brought it out into the public. This has been 40 years since the Greensboro massacre, and that reminds me that we unfortunately had a person that was involved in that from our community. He was in prison for making elaborate plans to bomb Greensboro if the murderers of the Workers' Party in Greensboro were convicted. And he served much time. He was from my community. But I don't want you to get the idea that everybody up there is a neo-Nazi or KKK member and they hang Confederate flags from their car. There is that. But for the most part, the people that live there are people that have tried to eke out a living there, just like everybody else that are native mountain people. They're in a geographically isolated area. They certainly didn't come to the area because they had a nice summer home waiting for them in 1800 or 1780. They came because they were probably trying to get away from something else, whether it was the law or poverty or hunger or religious restrictions. But they came there with no wealth, and it's pretty hard to scrabble lives. So people in our little mountain communities, and I'm a native so I can talk about this, have always been susceptible and vulnerable to those people that will come in and take advantage of them, saying somebody's trying to take something from you. What little bit you have, they're going to take it. So I understand where people are coming from, and that's what we try to do up there, is meet people where they are, because I decided a long time ago, I can't change people's minds, I can't change people, but we can change policy, we can educate, we can show that there are different and better ways, and that we are all a community, no matter what our race is. We grew up there, we need to take care of each other and spend time with each other and understand each other. So our branch, we focus a lot on the educational part. We have had a lot of challenges. Like I said, people want to know why we're there. We have had threats made on social media, which was carried on the Sheriff's Department site for weeks. We've had people call us and threaten us. We've had school teachers talk about us and downplay us. And you haven't been afraid until you go into a town hall meeting and you stand up for law enforcement change. They're not real happy about that. But I am from there, so I did have that, you know, I've crossed that language barrier where I can at least speak to people, and I don't care if I'm made fun of or whatever. So I've sat at many tables, at many festivals and fairs, next to the Sons of the Confederacy encampment display, and I've put up with that. I have a brother on the town council locally that doesn't speak to me. But we march to the polls, we hold vigils, we hold one last month and one the month before on immigration rights in the middle of towns. We march to the polls, we travel to the state capitol, we've been to the U.S. Capitol together, we're not afraid to make ourselves known to our legislators in Raleigh. They know me by name. I don't feel bad about going to their office and saying, hey, I'm here and this is what we're talking about right now. We're going to focus in the near future on voter registration, educating people about gerrymandering and the new voter ID, which I believe is still in litigation by the state NAACP. One of the things that I am most proud of for our branch and for our area is our scholarship program that we started when one of our founding mothers, Raven Tata, passed away. We began a scholarship program for DACA students at the local community college, and so far we've given $5,000, and we're getting ready to present $1,500 more. We're very proud of that, and I'm also proud. I'm also very, very proud of the program we did on the integration of our Yancey County school system, where we had people who were the actual first students to integrate the high schools. We had students who, African American students and Hispanic students that attend high school now, and we also had a couple of older members who attended segregated schools way before Brown versus Board of Education. And we had to do some real talking to people to get them to agree to do it, because it's a hurtful subject. You know, it's not something that, and I understand that, and I try to respect that. But we had people talking and just being very honest about how they felt and how they felt then and how they feel now and where they think they're going. And it was one of the most amazing functions I'd ever attended. And we learned a lot from each other, and that has been a nice side effect of being there, that not only do we interact with each other's communities more now, but we know each other more now. We break bread together, we eat together, we go on field trips together. We are building a community, and if nothing else, that we get done nothing else, that's a big thing for me, is to make our community tighter and more just, more equal, and have everybody respect each other and their space. And that's it. Thank you.
As you can see, there are similarities and there are some differences. Among the similarities, the two counties that have NAACP chapters before the spurt in the far west, Henderson and Asheville, have the largest number of African Americans in Western Carolina. So it makes some sense that we built, and we did build on those foundations. I mean, anybody who listened to that person and wasn't saying amen and say it, sister, was probably not paying attention to her. So similarities that we have. 2 older chapters, foundation for a lot of newer chapters. The spurt was stimulated in part by things happening locally, a shooting, or things that were happening in Raleigh, a lot of legislation that disadvantaged particularly poor people. Almost everybody talked about Reverend Barber, and almost all of us have, in fact, all of us up here have interacted with him, seen him, and listened to him, and it's hard not to be moved by that. There is a moral foundation to almost every one of these chapters. In fact, there is a moral foundation in every one of these chapters. The Black church has been instrumental in helping establish branches, for example, in Jackson County. And in Yancey Mitchell, there were a number of white ministers that were instrumental in helping them set up stuff. So that's a commonality. We are a white majority, but we are steeped, as Robin said, in bridging lines that have not been consciously bridged before. In other words, many of us have engaged in long conversations with people that we had not talked with before. And those conversations have forged new friendships and greater communication as trust builds. All of us have engaged in a variety of actions. One of my favorite quotes from a Yancey Mitchell article was, well, just think of us as a Rotary Club with signs. And we are more than Rotary Clubs with signs, but we do a lot of things with signs and marches, and also, as you've heard, a lot of things with legal redress. Before I open it up for questions, I want to play a little on Enrique's forest metaphor. We all know that there is death in monoculture. If you have a Christmas tree farm, it will eventually die because it's a monoculture. If you grow one kind of banana, it will eventually die when a blight strikes, as it is right now. So those of you who like bananas, keep that in mind, because we have reduced ourselves to but one kind.
Cavendish.
Yes. The strength of a forest is its diversity. And it persists in its diversity. It communicates in its diversity. And it is that diversity that all of us are attempting to accomplish in new and different ways. I want to thank Carol Hogue for pushing us to do this, and you all for coming to attend us. And anybody have any questions for any of these panelists up here? Yes, ma'am?
Thank you. Not a question, just an observation. And I want to thank Melinda. She knows that for a number of years, I'm Sophie Dixon from Asheville. I have served as president of the Asheville branch. I've been a member of the NAACP for 50 years. During that time, I worked with the state, I worked with the secretary for the state, I worked as president of the Asheville branch, so Melinda knows that for all that number of years, or most of that time, we basically had one branch. And what I want to point out is that in that time, we were called into all the counties, not just the counties where there are large numbers of African Americans, but where there were few. And those few really were the minority. And they were having some real problems, and they were called. So as a result, we actually ended up moving downtown Asheville. We were on Patton Avenue, and that's where we remained until we were no longer over the NAACP until 2013. And so everybody could find us, and they did. So thank you. It's great to see that we now have, and you took a great point with when you took the NAACP to work from. Thank you.
Really need to check out that particular gentleman. He did go from Asheville everywhere.
First of all, thank you. You people are fantastic. I thought this was just wonderful. The way it's been inspiring. The question I have is relating to the future. And particularly in Buncombe County, we've been trying to build a membership of our chapter. And we are constantly reminded by people that we talk to that this is an old, venerable organization. It's bureaucratic. How do we inspire this younger generation to come in? We have some ideas on doing it, but I would be very grateful for your ideas on how we can do it. Because our chapter here, we're all old, frankly. Almost all of us are over the age of That doesn't work for the future. We need to bring in the teenagers, the 20s, the 30s, and we are finding, or we're searching for solutions. What do you suggest?
I see Marie's hand waving in the back. Is that a response to it?
Kind of, because I was going to go there, so.
First of all, as a Georgia girl, I'm just so full right now because I know how much this organization has meant to me. And going back, basically, the way I see it is, people were inspired by the election of the first African-American president, but then Reverend Barber was somebody you could touch and see and speak to. So what I'm thinking, as we talk about how these communities have basically been able to connect because there were barriers. There were barriers between town and gown because a lot of the people in the organizations were related or connected to colleges and universities, and they hadn't had a way to get into the community because people hadn't necessarily decided, let me just go down to Liberty Baptist Church and worship with them, or with, Reverend Lee, etc. But taking these field trips, I think immediately we're talking about the first step is to go back to the legalized integration of the communities is everybody have these oral history sessions with people. And it may take some time because there's trauma involved with the integration of organizations. Now I'm thinking about my dear friend Victoria Casey that as a Black college professor coming from rural North Georgia to Western, she gave me that entree to the community, but she always reminded me that it was also traumatic because Black communities lost their Black institutions in integration. So it wasn't a happy ever after story. So that's the one thing. The other thing that I've been thinking about is all the fear about this has been race mixing from the very beginning. So I come back to my hometown and I see all these interracial children. These are not adopted children very often. And if we do, like you said, the real work of doing the research of thinking about changing demographics, blah, 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 I'm thinking about reaching out to those young, white, poor mothers. Because they need help raising their interracial children. And I'm talking about where the father might be African American or Hispanic. So I think that's something to consider as we continue to do this work, because those families need help, because they're not getting help in their schools. So taking the children where you go, when you go to the Highlander Center, when you go to the Civil Rights Museum in Atlanta or the King Center, or to the Lynch Museum or whatever, but also to think about those families, because I've been thinking about those families a lot lately in my community.
Everybody's about giving advice.
In response to your question, you know that the state has a youth branch, right? Each unit is supposed to have a youth branch. So what we have done is we have paid for youth membership. We're training those youth in our branch. We even let them spearhead one of our fundraisers. We've taken them on field trips. So what I would say to the Asheville County branch is when we reorganize, when we get reorganized and we get started up again, that we find an individual, and I'm sure Ms. Sophie will agree with me, who can work with the youth. And then we all gather around that individual and help them to bring the youth in. But we have to let the youth participate.
And be leaders.
And be leaders. We are so apt, being a senior citizen, as always being in control. And that, I think that way, when we found out that when we let the youth in our branch participate and they took leadership roles, it was the best fundraiser we ever had. So that's my suggestion, is that we start looking at an individual we can target to work with the youth. We only need 25 members. to have a youth unit within the branch. So if you need assistance, we have a phenomenal young lady at the state that can come up and help. All we have to do is ask. Just ask her, forget about that pride, forget about all those other issues that we have, and just ask for help, and help will come. And another thing I want to, being away from the NAACP, says National Association for Colored People. It didn't say what color. And if you know the history, it wasn't just started with blacks. It was black, white, and of the Jewish faith that organized the NAACP. So that's what we need to do, is learn the history and then spread that history, that message of the history. And I think we will stop some of this that's going on. It's that fear of the unknown that keeps us from coming together. But that's my suggestion to any branch, is to get your youth leader.
All right, we have real fast up here, and then we have somebody in the back.
I'll keep this really short. When I talk to these parents of biracial and African American children who are having trouble in schools, I almost always recommend to them that they read Ta-Nehisi Coates, Between the World and Me, because that tells it like it is and helps them understand what their child is going through.
Good morning. My name is Nicole Cush. Excuse my voice, I lost it. And I'm principal of the School of Integrated Life Sciences at Asheville, the other high school at Asheville High School. And I just became a member while I was listening. I just signed up. And I would like to, and I am wanting to do whatever I can. I have been a principal here now for a little over a year. And I want to do whatever I can to help you get to my kids. So let me be of service in that way to help you get into the schools. I extend an invitation to you. Please sign up, members, the older members, sign up to be substitutes if you're retired. Please come volunteer and eat lunch with my students. I will give you full access. It's just a process of filling out a small form. I will do whatever it takes to help you get through the doors of Asheville High School in Silson. So please come in.
That person back there, when we are finished here, and I'm going to turn this back over to our fearless leader here.
Thank you, Penny. And thank you all for this panel. I think it sounds like it has been very, very informative for everybody who's out here. Again, thank you for the work that you've been doing here. I was so glad to see Miss Sophie Dixon here as well, because she has so much of this history. And I just wanted to point out again that we took the time as the conference this year to recognize her service to the community. So I just want to do that again and give her a round of applause. So thank you all for being here. We look forward to continuing conversations with you all here at the university, and however we can continue to be of service here, just let us know. Right now, we're going to begin to go upstairs for the brunch that will be honoring Stevens Lee High School, and then we'll see you back here in the afternoon for another session. Thank you all again.
Before we leave, excuse me, I have membership forms. If you'd like to join the NAACP today, it's only $30 a year. Make it real.